Okay, welcome to all you, and especially a welcome to Julie Kiriakov Caswell. It's such a delight to have her here as we commemorate the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Our other speakers in this series that we have put on have been scholars, and certainly Julie fits into that category. But in addition to that, she is a personal witness, an eyewitness to the events in communist Eastern Europe. She was born and raised in Bulgaria at a time shortly after that country came under the heavy influence of the Soviet Union. She and her family were then able to live for a couple of years in Algeria on a special medical mission, and they then applied for and fled to France rather than return to communist Bulgaria. In France, she and her family met the missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and were baptized. And she then traveled to Provo, Utah to attend Brigham Young University, where she received bachelor's and master's degrees in Russian and French. She is a linguist, a studier of languages. She has taught for many, many years at BYU and at other colleges, particularly in the Washington, D.C. area. She worked on a translation of the Book of Mormon into Bulgarian, and she made a career not only in teaching but in radio, and in that respect she was a radio announcer for Voice of America. Voice of America was this incredible project by the U.S. government to stream essentially anti-communist information into Eastern Europe, and she was an announcer for the Bulgarian edition of Voice of America. So it is our great pleasure, and please join me in welcoming Julie Kiriakov Caswell.
Thank you, Jeff. Born and raised in Bulgaria, I lived there for 16 years and thought that I was living just like anybody else and that everybody else was under communism. And the history books were rewritten. So I didn't know the truth. I only knew what the history books said and what my school taught me. It started long ago when I was 6 years old. A 6-year-old in Bulgaria starts kindergarten. I went to kindergarten dressed in my uniform and sat down as part of 40 little 6-year-old kids. How many of you believe in God, said my kindergarten teacher. I looked around. I have been taught by my parents never to raise my hand, always go with majority. I looked around and everybody was raising their hand that they were believing in God. So I joined. I raised my hand. We'll see, said my teacher. Now that you say you believe in God, go on your knees, pray to God to give you a couple of pieces of candy. Candy were hard to come by, and so we all went down on our knees, we prayed, and after a couple of minutes, she said, okay, open your eyes now and see, did you get candy? Nobody got even one piece of candy. So she said, now, if you pray to this great leader of ours, Stalin, and there was a huge portrait of Stalin, the one you see on the slide, 5 feet by 4 feet, right above the blackboard in front of our eyes. So we went on our knees, we prayed to him, and to our astonishment, when we opened our eyes, there were 2 pieces of candy on everybody's desk. I was impressed. I went home and told my parents, I'm no longer praying to God, I no longer believe in God, because I prayed to Stalin and he gave me candy. My parents were appalled at the bad propaganda that was being spread. And they introduced a special way of communicating. We would write our thoughts on little pieces of paper, or we would peel an apple and write our thoughts on the peelings of an apple and not say a word, so that our neighbors or people going by a window up in front on the street could hear us. And that became a way of communication. So then we would burn those apple peels or pieces of paper in our coal-burning stove, so there will not be any trace of our communication. Then I was taught what we call the art of doublethink. I would go next to a wall or a window, an open window, and I would spout out the propaganda that I was taught in school. I would say, I love my leader and great man, Joseph Stalin. I will follow in his steps. His example to me is a wonderful example in life to follow. And then I know the people on the other side of the wall would go, because they know that I'm acting, that I'm just spouting out what I have been taught. But at the same time, I would be writing the little pieces of paper that I would pass to my parents or my grandparents and communicate in such a way. As soon as my parents found out how intense the propaganda was against the children, they decided to counteract, and they decided that the time had come for me to be introduced to the daily broadcasts of the Voice of America. And here you see my grandmother, Martha, me next to my grandmother, and my two brothers listening to the Voice of America broadcast. We were all introduced to those at night before we went to sleep. We had a special radio, and we would hug around the radio because we would put it very low so that the neighbors or other people passing by would not hear us, because it was punishable by imprisonment if you listened to the Voice of America, because it was a reactionary broadcast. This is how we found out that in August of 1961, there was a wall being built. The wall was being built between East and West Berlin. And we were surprised that nothing was said in the Bulgarian newspapers or the Bulgarian broadcasts of Radio Sofia, Bulgaria. And it was interesting that at the same time, in August of 1961, there were leaflets that was dropped for us to read. And my daughter Michelle has an example of a leaflet that was dropped in Sofia. And you can read and see the information was being given to us. But at the same time, the broadcasts of the Voice of America was jammed. So we had to have a special jamming device which removed the jamming from our shortwave radio. we made it a practice to listen to the Voice of America every night. We got so attached to it that later, when I was a freshman at BYU, during the summer of 1967, my brother Peter and I, my brother Peter had just arrived, and he said to me, "One thing I want to see is the Voice of America in Washington, D.C." And I said, "Okay, we'll go there." And so we went and visited the Voice of America in 1967. We just walked there. It was the address was 330 Independence Avenue in the heart of Washington, D.C. They were on the first floor in the HEW building. We went there and we met a bunch of elderly people. To us, they looked elderly. They were in their 60s, some of them in their 70s, and they spoke interesting Bulgarian to our ears. They were speaking with an accent, and they were saying words we had never heard. They offered us $50 each, and they interviewed us, and they said, "Is it okay if we broadcast this interview to Bulgaria?" And we said, "By all means, but don't use our family name. Just say Julie and Peter." And they did. And later on, my grandfather, grandmother, my aunts and uncles told us that they heard my voice and my brother Peter's voice, and they cried because they had not seen us for a few years. When I was 16 years old, and after the wall had been built, the building of the wall actually gave my parents the impulse, or the decision, the impulse helped the decision that they made to escape from Bulgaria. 2 years later, an opportunity presented itself. My dad, who was a dental technician, was part of a team of 7 dental technicians working for the Research Institute of Bulgaria in Sofia, Bulgaria. And one day he went to work, and the other 6 dental technicians were waiting outside, and he was surprised, and they said, "Well, we have received a memo, and the memo gives the opportunity to one of us to go to Algeria for 2 years. It's a rare opportunity to leave our country and see what the world outside the country looks like. Until then, nobody was allowed to leave Bulgaria. In order to go to one of the borders of Bulgaria, you had to have special permission from the police department in Bulgaria. So my dad joined the other 7. They said, "We have decided that the fairest thing to do is to draw lots. There are 7 of us here," so they took 7 pieces of paper, they folded them, they put them in a box, they passed the box around, everybody drew, my dad drew the yes. Nobody was excited about it. They said, "Well, we need to draw at least 3 times." So they refolded the pieces of paper, they passed the box around the second time, my dad drew the yes, the third time my dad drew the yes. So they said, "Okay, this is obvious that this man has marked the piece of paper. Therefore, the first 3 times are not going to count." They took new pieces of paper, they put them in one of those deep Russian hats. They passed the hat around, everybody drew. My dad drew the yes for the 4th time. At that point, everybody was upset. They were saying maybe this was not such a good idea It's not a fair thing to do. So the fifth time, they blindfolded my dad, and he still drew the yes. The sixth time, they said, there are 7 of us, so we're going to draw 7 times out of 7. And so the fifth time, they blindfolded my dad. The sixth time, they asked him to leave, so somebody else drew instead of him. And still the yes paper was drawn. And then the last time, they said, we're all going to draw first. He's going to be last. So they all drew, and they all opened their papers, and it was no. So my dad drew 7 times out of 7 that, you have a chance, 1 in a million, to be precise, 1 in 855,000, something like that. My dad got this chance, and we went to Algeria, spent there 2 years, and decided then from Algeria to go to France instead of going back to Bulgaria. And in France, when we landed in Marseille, all of us cried and said, we're free, we're no longer going back to Bulgaria. And we bought a map of France, and we voted where exactly we would go. So we decided to be the furthest from Marseille, where most Bulgarians would land, and the furthest from Paris. So somewhere in the middle, we pointed to Rennes, R-E-N-N-E-S. Well, Rennes had just been opened maybe for a year or so, a year and a half. It had been open to the preaching of the gospel, and there were missionaries there. And a year after we arrived in Rennes, 2 missionaries knocked on my door. It was Elder Bendio and Elder Barkley, and Elder Bendio is here among us. I'm very grateful to him and to Elder Barkley, and they taught us the gospel. And then on the 9th of July, 1966, Elder Bendio baptized us, my parents and me, in the Atlantic Ocean. And it was a great experience. It's been a great experience ever since. So I'm eternally grateful to those 2 missionaries who trekked us out. Right after I applied to come to BYU as a freshman, I applied to the University of Quebec and BYU, and I said, whichever university gives me a scholarship first, that's where I'll go. And it was BYU, so I came to BYU. And I was about to graduate with my first degree when I met Tom Caswell, my husband. We got married, and he said, what is going to make you happy? I will do anything to make you happy. And I said, I would like to leave the States and see how the church progresses in the world. And he said, well, I am too young to be a general authority. So the next best thing is to join the Foreign Service. That's the diplomatic service of the United States. And so he took the test and joined the State Department Foreign Service. And our very first assignment was Dusseldorf, Germany. I'd like to backtrack a little bit. While at BYU, I was making special features. I was writing articles about life at BYU, student life at BYU, because it was so foreign to the Bulgarian students. And because the Voice of America had a contract with me, they were using me as what they call a stringer, long-distance writer. So I would write something maybe 3 to 4 minutes and of a special feature. Then I would go to the BYU radio station here and voice it. And BYU loved it because, and I was doing it free of charge, and then I would send the recording by mail to the Voice of America, and then they would broadcast it to Bulgaria. I did quite a few of those special features, and they broadcast them. When I graduated with my second degree, my master's, they offered me a full-time position, and Tom and I, and at the time, our daughter Danielle, who was born in Provo while we were students, we moved to Vienna, Virginia, where we lived while I worked for the Voice of America, and Tom worked for the Commerce Department. And I was, as a full-time person, I was an MC, and I was in charge of hard news and special features. After Tom joined the Foreign Service, our first assignment was Dusseldorf, Germany, and for the bicentennial in 1976, after our daughter Michelle was born in Germany, the crazy Americans of Dusseldorf decided, hey, let's have some fun for the centennial. Let's go to East Berlin. And they said, oh, Julie, you have to come. You have to see what it looks like. You must miss it, not being in the East. And I thought, I hate to go, but I went. We all loaded on a bus in Berlin. We went by train to Berlin, and then we all loaded on a bus. And as we came to Checkpoint Charlie, my heart was going to die. I felt like somebody had stabbed me, and I was so fearful. The old fear and the old stomachache that I had constantly when we were listening to the Voice of America came back, and I didn't tell anybody, so we were stopped, and I thought, that's it. They were checking our passports. The passport, even though it was a diplomatic passport, it said, Julia Kiriakov Caswell, born in Sofia, Bulgaria. And I thought, when will I get rid of this horrible spot on the passport? Why do they say that I was born there? Why don't they say I was born in Utah or Virginia? and it's just so dangerous for me. So the bus went in, and it all came back to me. The gray buildings, the sad people walking on the streets, everything was gray. There was no color. And all the Americans on the bus were saying, how come people are so unhappy here? And they all had a lot of fun. They stopped at a square, and everybody got off the bus except me and the American driver. And they tried to do everything to get me off that bus. They couldn't.
The U.S. Army bus with a uniformed soldier driving.
Yes. And I would not get off. So that was my experience at Checkpoint Charlie. When we entered back, I went back to good health again. I was so worried. So this is me graduating from BYU, my graduation picture. I kept writing the special features. And from Dusseldorf, we went to São Paulo, Brazil, where we stayed for 2.5 years. And we were there temple workers at the São Paulo temple. And from there, we went to the islands of the Azores, where we welcomed the first missionaries on the island of São Miguel. And from there, we went to Lisbon, Portugal, where we saw the first Portuguese stake formed, and where we stayed for 4 years. And then from there, we went to Belgium, where my husband Tom served his mission. We stayed for 4 years. And then in 1987, we came back to the States and lived in Manassas, Virginia. And I started working for a bank called Piedmont Savings Bank in Manassas, Virginia. But all through working, every night when I say my prayer, I would hear a voice. What about the Voice of America? And I would think, it's a 2-hour commute from Manassas to Washington, D.C. to get there, and 2 hours to come back. And with my 6 children, it's very hard to do that. And the voice would persist. And so I discussed it with Tom, my husband, and he said, you have to give them a call. So I gave them a call, and they said, please come, we need you. So I started working for them again. I worked Monday through Friday, and started at commuting at 5, got there at 7, and then did 2 broadcasts, and in between did a lot of translation of hard news. And a lot of, they put me in charge of what they call famous people. I interviewed a lot of interesting, famous people, mainly American authors, American bands like the Beach Boys, at one point earlier, a few years earlier, I had interviewed Edward Teller, the father of the American H-bomb, and a few other people. It was very, very interesting, but it was exhausting, which took me and Tom and our 6 children to the 9th of November, 1989. And Tom and I were watching, the children were already asleep, and we were watching about midnight the falling of the Berlin Wall on the 9th of November, 1989. And we were both crying. And Tom kept saying, this changes everything. Can you believe this? This changes everything. And I remembered the words of President Ezra Taft Benson after talking with him and telling him how sad I was that my people, the Bulgarian people, had not been given the opportunity of the preaching of the gospel, and there were no missionaries there. And even though the Book of Mormon was already translated and waiting to be distributed there, the doors were still closed. And he told me not to worry about it. He told me that the Lord was in charge. So when we saw this, I thought, the Lord is removing the wall. This is the beginning of what's going to happen to communism. I also remembered what President Reagan said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down the wall." And I thought, wow, this president has all the courage that all the other presidents have ever lacked. And just like he said, the wall was torn down. Incredible. It was, and we cried and cried, and we turned off the television, and we went to bed. And that was the night of the 9th of November, 1989. So right in the middle of the night, the early morning of November 10th, 1989, the phone rang. And I said, "Oh, I'm so tired. Let's not answer the phone." Tom said, "Oh, must be something important." So he picked up the phone and he said, "The Voice of America is calling you." And I thought, what's wrong with people calling me in the middle of the night? I took the phone and I said, "Yes." And they said, "You've got to come. Somebody has to announce to the Bulgarian people that the wall has fallen, that they are free, and that the Bulgarian dictator of 35 years is now put under house arrest." And I said, "You know what? It can wait until the morning." And they said, "Please come, please." And they were begging me, so Tom heard my conversation, so he grabbed my clothes. I was in my pajamas, and he said, "Let's go, I'll drive you. And you can dress while I'm driving you." So I was dressing inside the car while he was driving, and we got there in an hour. Usually you commute 2 hours, but we got there in an hour because there was no traffic. It was in the middle of the night, 3 in the morning. So I got there. I couldn't believe my eyes when I got there. Everybody was drunk. Everybody had celebrated. The whole night was a night of celebration that Bulgaria was free. These people were older people. These people had escaped from Bulgaria before Bulgaria became a communist country. So it was completely different. For me, I didn't know anything better when I was born there. I was born after communism came, while these people had waited all their life for this particular day to come, just like I was waiting. So when I got there and they gave me the script to read, for the first time in many years, my voice broke, and I actually had to clear my voice and repeat a line which said, "You are free, my people." And it was a very emotional experience for me, and a privilege to announce to my people what the script said, which was that they were free, that Todor Zhivkov, the president, dictator of the Bulgarian people for 35 years, he had reigned for 35 years, that he was put under house arrest, and that there were going to be elections, free elections very soon, and Bulgaria was going to become a democratic republic. And the interesting thing was that very soon, just a couple of months later, I received an invitation from the missionary department of the church to come and teach the first Bulgarian missionaries. They came on the 14th of February, 1991, and Tom gave up he resigned his job as a bullion coin manager at the U.S. Mint in Washington, D.C., and just so that he followed me here to be a teacher at the MTC for the Bulgarian missionaries. And it has been a very great experience. I taught from 1991 to 2001 at the MTC, the Bulgarian group of missionaries, about between 450, 500 missionaries I've taught. And they included my daughter Michelle, who served a mission to Bulgaria. They included my son Bob, who served a mission after Michelle, and also my mom and dad. My dad was the first mission president to open the land of Bulgaria for the preaching of the gospel in 1991. He was set apart by President Oakes, and in his words, my dad was like Moses. He had been raised in Bulgaria, and he was taken out of there by the hand of the Lord to be taught in the States and prepared to go back and lead his people. So it has been a great experience. It's been a privilege to announce to my people that they were free. And one of the members of our ward at the time, the first ward of the Heatheridge stake, brought me a piece of the Berlin Wall. I have it somewhere at home, but everybody knew that it was so important to me to have the doors of Bulgaria open for the preaching of the gospel. So I think I have covered everything. And if you have any questions, I can answer them for you.
Talk about when you went to Bulgaria and people recognized your voice.
When my dad was called to be a mission president in 1991, I went back to Bulgaria for Thanksgiving, 1991, and my parents wanted me to go and speak to gatherings of mainly students. And I went to the University of Bulgaria. I went to other universities, also the tech schools, and in different towns, not just the capital of Bulgaria. And everywhere I would go, there would be this dead silence. And people would look at me in awe. And I thought, I am such a great missionary. They just love me. So finally, I found out what the whole thing was all about. One of them raised his hand and said to me, I think you're the one. And I said, I'm the one what? And he said, you announced to the Bulgarian people that they're free. I remember your voice. What was your name? And I said, never mind my name. It's, as long as you remember my voice, that's what matters. So I found out I wasn't such a great missionary after all. It was kind of disappointing. So, if you have any questions.
If you have questions, please come up to the microphone. We are recording this, and so we do need your voice in the mic. And just tell us who you are and then what your question is. Thank you. We've got a microphone on the side.
Okay, got it. My name is Mary Young, and I am in the ward with her daughter, Michelle Forstrom. And I have been told by her that you were instrumental in translating the Book of Mormon into Bulgarian. I'd like to hear about that.
The Book of Mormon was translated in 1926 in the Bulgarian/Macedonian language by a sister, Evangelina Coy, C-O-Y. And she wrote it in school notebooks. And it was in the Old Bulgarian. I was not taught in the Old Bulgarian, but I asked my mom to give me lessons. After I got the lessons, I was able to read it, and then using her translation, using the French translation of the Book of Mormon, because I was in France when I was converted to the gospel, and using the German and Russian translation, then I did the second after Sister Coy. And then I typed up the translation on a little Olympia typewriter, which the church ordered especially for me from Switzerland. And then I returned the typewriter and the typewritten pages to the church missionary department in 1974, when our first son, Tom, was born.
Tell about translating Alma.
What?
The Book of Alma, translating Alma.
Oh, when I was typing, I was very impatient. I was pregnant, and it was very hot in Virginia. And as I got to typing Alma, I said out loud, "Oh, Alma, you knew that I'd be translating and typing this. Why did you write so much?" You could have had a summary. And so I was typing, and then all of a sudden, I felt a presence, and I felt my hand was flying all over. And I couldn't believe my hand, because I was picking the little letters on the typewriter. All through Alma, I typed very, very fast and very efficiently. And then when I stopped and I went into Helaman, well, the magic stopped too. So I had an interesting experience with Alma. He's my very favorite writer of the Book of Mormon, and I also love his, Alma the Younger, and I love his conversion story too, so he's my favorite.
My name's Neil Millman. I happen to be a traveling geographer, and I had the privilege of actually living in Germany from 1988 to 1991. I was in Berlin when the wall came down on November 9th, and I was there on January 1st when they had the big celebration at the Brandenburg Gate. So, and I got to go into East Berlin that day, January 1st, and see real communism. And as you say, it's the grayest city in the world, even though communists were touting as being the great symbol of communism and everything. But anyway, one of the things I observed in 1989 while living there was the first migration of East Europeans traveling through Austria, coming into Germany.
Yeah.
They were starting to loosen the Berlin Wall, and that eventually led to the fall of the Iron Curtain.
Yeah.
So my question is kind of two parts. First of all, for you, during this period of communism before 1989, what was the freedom of the ordinary people to travel throughout the Eastern Bloc, to travel to other communist countries? Was it very restricted or whatever? And secondly, what can you say about the eventual flood of people from East Europe coming into Germany that kind of brought down the Iron Curtain?
It's interesting because the reason the wall was put up was because 20% of the East Germany population escaped and went west. And they thought, well, there will not be any East Germany if this continues. We better build up a wall. It was very restricted. Travel was very restricted. You had to have a recommendation from the person in charge of the place where you were living with that special permission, which said that you were an exemplary citizen. You had to go to the police department, which at the time was called the militia department. And then from there, you had to be issued a foreign passport. Nobody had a foreign passport. And you had to wait months and months to be issued that passport.
You even had to have an internal passport to travel around inside Bulgaria, right?
Oh, yeah. The internal passport, everybody had it, and you needed it to go inside Bulgaria. And even that was restricted. You had to be given special permissions from different authorities. So, and I know that a lot of Bulgarians flooded eastern Berlin in order to make it to West Berlin when the wall fell. Everybody wanted to be free. You can't even imagine how it feels not being free, how it feels to have every step you make restricted, and never speak your mind and never tell other people what is in your heart. You just had to learn the art of the double think. So.
May I ask a follow-up question about just now? So you answered the question that people, even when they travel among the communist area, it's still restricted, even inside the country itself. Would you?
Louder if you could.
Okay. Would you please help us understand why people are restricted to travel even inside their own country or inside the communist?
Well, the reason people were restricted was because of the authority of the Communist Party. They wanted to know where you were every step of your life. And they couldn't keep track of you unless they put you in a cage. And they kept track that way. They just went following you, giving you a passport for this, a card for this, sign here, leave there, and so they kept track. It's for keeping track of you.
They also wanted to control the flow of information so that people,
That people were not allowed to know the truth. It was just part of the communist regime.
Okay. Our time is at an end. Thank you so much for the lecture. Would you join me in thanking our speakers?